Welcome, friends, to Portal to the Past, time travel with picture book tales from Powell River Public Library and real local historical content from the Powell River Historical Museum and Archives. This month's story is On the Trapline, and our topic will be Coast Salish living on the land. Are you ready?
Today's story will be read to you by Sonia Zagwyn from the Powell River Public Library. After the story, Joëlle Sévigny from the Powell River Historical Museum and Archives will tell you about the local First Nations and their traditional ways of life.
On the Trapline, written by David A. Robertson, with illustrations by Julie Flett. Published by Tundra. I'm on my way up north because Mooshum, my grandpa, is taking me to his trapline. I've never been there before, and Mooshum says he hasn't been since he was a kid like me. When I look out the window, all I can see are trees and water. The lakes look like blue clouds in a green sky. What is a trapline? I ask. Traplines are where people hunt animals and live off the land, he says. When we touch down in the community, Mooshum's old friend is waiting for us. Tansi, he says to Mooshum. Tansi, Mooshum says to him. Mooshum speaks Swampy Cree when he's around friends. Hi, I say. That's what Tansi means in English. It's different here. In the city, everything's all bunched up. In the north, there's so much space. Mooshum says relatives live in houses close to each other, but to me, it looks like there's still lots of room between them. Kiwetinok means north. We pull up to a small house beside a big lake. Is this your trapline? I ask. No, Mooshum says. This is where we lived after we left the trapline. Mooshum tells me that in the winter, everybody in the family slept in one room where the wood stove kept them warm. He says it was nice being together like that. I guess some things are bunched up in the north. Wakomakanak means family. We walk to the shore behind the house. There are all kinds of rocks, big and small, round and flat. I think about the beach I go to near the city where there's only sand. This is where we used to swim, Mooshum says. Mooshum tells me that he and his brothers and sisters made paper boats here too. They would pretend the boats were freighters and put tiny rocks in them to see how long they would float. Kapasamo means swim. We drive down a gravel road that winds through trees like a snake. At the end of the road, a path leads to the remains of an old building. This is where I went to school after we left the trapline, Mooshum says. Most of the kids only spoke Cree, but at the school, all of us had to talk and learn in English. Did you still get to speak Cree? I ask. My friends and I snuck into the bush so we could speak our language, he says. Ininimowin means Cree language. To be continued. We have only read a portion of this book for this portal to respect copyright. To finish the story, visit your local library to reserve and read a copy of the book, or follow the link in the video description to find out how you can invite Sonia and Joëlle into your classroom to deliver an interactive portal to the past.
Although the story Sonia read did not take place on the West Coast, traplines exist here too. Where we live, work, and play today is part of the traditional territory of the Coast Salish peoples who have inhabited these lands since time immemorial. The Coast Salish people are a group made up of many other groups of indigenous communities located all along the Salish Sea. In this part of the Sunshine Coast, it is the Tla'amin Nation who resides here. Traditional Tla'amin lands include the area on the North Sunshine Coast, from Stillwater to the Malaspina Peninsula. It also includes the islands of Cortez, Sayre, Hernando, Harwood, and the northern half of Texada. The land and the water of the Pacific Northwest are at the heart of Coast Salish cultural beliefs and practices. The environment is tied very closely with their traditions and ways of life. In the 1800s, settlers, missionaries, and government agents arrived on the traditional lands of the Tla'amin Nation. As a result of colonization by the Canadian government and the reservation system they created, Tla'amin peoples were relocated to the village of Sliammon. This resulted in many changes that were and continue to have negative impacts on their traditional ways of life. Here you can see an aerial view of Sliammon today. The beautiful baby blue color of the ocean is caused by the herring spawning, which is where the traditional name for Sliammon village stems from, Tioshum. Traditionally, the eggs of herring, called herring roe, are collected using cedar branches. This image from 1939 shows drying herring roe on cedar boughs in Sliammon. Herring is a great source of food for the Tla'amin people and Coast Salish peoples located all along the west coast. In this photo, we see Kikwanum, the traditional place name for Scuttle Bay, which means water rushing in fast. In this photo, we see, in the same bay here, we see a Tla'amin man who has just caught 2 fish. You can also observe the 2 canoes close by. These are called dugout canoes and are an important mode of transportation for the Coast Salish peoples. Dugout canoes are carved from cedar by hollowing out the inside of a tree. It requires a very high level of skill to accomplish, but once completed, the canoes allowed for the Tla'amin people to travel to islands and gather important food items from the sea. The sea was the biggest food source. There are a few ways used to catch fish. Coast Salish peoples often use gill nets, like you see here, and gaff hooks. They would also use fish traps, which are rock structures on the coastline. As the water went out with the tide, fish would be trapped in pools of water, making it easier to catch. They got halibut and crab this way with harpoons and gaff hooks. This method allowed for the Coast Salish people to sustain large populations. Locally, you can see them at Willington Beach, the Seawalk, and at the beachfront in Sliammon. One type of fish widely eaten by the Coast Salish peoples is salmon. Here you can see a Tla'amin woman preparing a flank of salmon. Woman usually prepares the fish for smoking, which is an important food source for the winter. Fish can also be barbecued or boiled over a fire. Shellfish, gathered at low tide by digging in the sand, like clams, can also be boiled, steamed, or barbecued. Mussels, crabs, sea cucumbers were all harvested as well. Although the ocean was an important resource for food, the land and surrounding lakes also played a crucial part. Traplines were set up inland, and before their numbers diminished, beavers were caught in this region. Deer was also hunted in the surrounding forests. Another food source found in the forests are a variety of berries, like salmon berries, blackberries, huckleberries, salal berries, cranberries, blueberries, and elderberries. Tla'amin people gathered all of these berries. They could be dried and kept for winter, or added to soups and other boiled foods. The most effective way of preserving large quantities of berries was to dry them into cakes. The berries were mashed, oftentimes several species mixed together, and then spread over leaves of skunk cabbage or maple leaves and left in the sun to dry. They would then be cut into squares and stored in a cedar box between leaves. When about to be eaten, they were soaked overnight first. A key natural resource for Coast Salish peoples is the cedar tree. Cedar plays a very important part in the traditional and spiritual beliefs of coastal First Nations. It is also at the core of the production of many material goods. First, cedar needs to be harvested. The best sites to harvest are said to be moist, sandy riversides where the trees are tall, straight, well spaced, and not too bushy. After harvesting and removing the core, cedar is ready for weaving. Coastal First Nations weave cedar into baskets and hats, as well as clothing and mats. They also make canoes and bailers out of cedar. As you saw earlier in the story, the character of Mosham is an older individual in his community. For many Indigenous communities, it is common for grandparents to raise their grandchildren. These older individuals are sometimes called elders. They are highly respected in their community because of their experience and knowledge about life. Elders pass down oral histories through storytelling. This ensures that traditional ways of life and knowledge is passed down from generation to generation. We've sadly come to the end of the story for today, but be sure to check out our next Portal to the Past on December 24th. Bye!